The silent town where shadows speak. In a remote valley shrouded by mist and surrounded by towering mountains, there was a town that was not on any map. This was the town of Aeloria, known to those few who had heard of it as the Silent Town. It was a place where the wind never howled, where the birds never sang, and where the air was heavy with an eerie stillness. But Aeloria had a secret, one that was spoken of only in whispers by those who had dared to visit and returned. The townspeople of Aeloria never spoke. They moved about their daily lives in utter silence, communicating with one another through gestures, looks, and most strangely, their shadows. It was said that in Aeloria, the shadows were alive, extensions of the people themselves, and they could speak. The shadows would murmur, whispering thoughts and secrets that the townsfolk could not, or would not, utter aloud. One cold, fog-laden evening, a traveler named Elias stumbled upon Aeloria. He had been wandering the wilderness for days, lost and weary, when he saw the faint glow of lanterns through the trees. Desperate for shelter, he made his way into the town, only to be greeted by its unsettling silence. The people he passed on the streets stared at him with wide, unblinking eyes, their mouths closed tight, their shadows flickering ominously beneath them. Elias found lodging at an inn at the center of town, run by a woman whose name he never learned. She offered him a room with a nod, her shadow elongating as she handed him the key. It was then that Elias noticed the shadow wasn't merely mimicking her movements. It seemed to move with a will of its own, its dark form shifting and quivering as if trying to speak. That night, as Elias lay in bed, he heard it for the first time, a whisper, faint and indistinct, drifting through the still air. He sat up, straining to hear, and realized the sound was coming from beneath the door. He stepped out into the hallway, and there, in the dim glow of a single candle, he saw them, shadows dark and wavering, whispering to each other in a language he could not understand. The shadows seemed to sense his presence, and as one, they turned toward him. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, forming a chorus of unintelligible voices. Elias backed away, retreating into his room, but the shadows followed, slipping through the cracks under the door, pooling around his feet. He could feel them brushing against his skin, cold as ice, whispering secrets that made his blood run cold. Over the next few days, Elias tried to learn more about the town and its strange inhabitants, but no one would speak to him. The townspeople moved through the streets like ghosts, their expressions blank, their shadows whispering in their stead. Elias tried to engage them, but they would only look at him with eyes that seemed hollow, empty, as if something vital had been drained from them. The only person who seemed different was an old man who sat by the fountain in the town square. His shadow, unlike the others, was silent, and when Elias approached him, the man offered him a sad, weary smile. "You are not the first to come here," the old man said, his voice cracking from disuse, "and you will not be the last. This town, it was not always like this. Once we were like any other place, full of life and laughter. But then the shadows came." He told Elias a tale of a curse that had befallen Aeloria long ago, when a sorcerer had come to the town seeking revenge for a slight long forgotten. The sorcerer had cast a spell that bound the townspeople to their shadows, taking their voices and leaving them in eternal silence. Their shadows, twisted by the dark magic, had gained a life of their own, speaking the thoughts and fears that the people could no longer express. "Beware," the old man warned, his voice barely a whisper. "The shadows are not just reflections of who we are. They are the darkness within us, the parts of ourselves we try to hide. And here, in Aeloria, they have free reign." Elias tried to leave the town, but no matter how far he walked, the mist would thicken, the mountains would loom closer, and he would find himself back at the gates of Aeloria. The town had claimed him, as it had claimed so many before. As the days turned into weeks, Elias began to change. He no longer tried to speak to the townspeople, no longer tried to flee. He started to understand the whispers of the shadows, and in them, he heard his own voice, speaking of fears and desires he had buried deep within himself. The shadows grew more insistent, more familiar, until one day he realized he could no longer hear his own thoughts without them being echoed by the dark form at his feet. In time, Elias became like the rest of the townspeople, silent, resigned, his shadow now speaking for him. He would sit by the fountain with the old man, who grew weaker with each passing day, his once silent shadow now whispering ceaselessly. The old man had warned Elias, but in the end, it had made no difference. The town had claimed him, as it would claim others. Aeloria remained, hidden away from the world, a place of silence where the shadows spoke. And though the world forgot about it, the town would endure, its people living out their days in quiet despair, their shadows whispering the truths they could no longer voice. For in Aeloria, the shadows would always speak, long after the last breath had been drawn. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.